Thank you all again for joining us today, everybody. Michelle, Keith, and Sean. And yeah, I'm Jeff, as Damon mentioned. And and again, a big thanks to Crowdfundr for hosting all of this. This is kind of an idea that I wanted to put together for a long time, and they were very gracious enough to kind of help put the whole thing together and host it and promote it. And yeah, special thanks to Damon and Mira and Dina, who I've been putting this all together with. So that's been really good. But yeah, without further ado, let's do some self-introductions just real quick. Like, you know, who you are, what books you publish, how long you've been publishing. If we want to kick that off with Keith.
Oh, sure. So Keith Morris, I've been working in operations and publishing comics since about 2010. Currently, I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief at Lev Gleason, and also the publishing consultant now for TPub Comics, which is a UK comics company. So yeah, that's a lot of English language, but not American products is really what my specialty is.
Very nice. And Michelle, how about yourself?
Well, I guess I'm a reformed and returned publisher. I published in the 90s as Black Eye Books, going the traditional route of releasing comics through distribution. At the time, there were many distributors. Diamond was one of them. And I stopped publishing in 1998 and got back into it in 2009 with a first crowdfunding project on Fundraiser, which was the predecessor to Crowdfundr.
Very nice. And yeah, and you've published a lot of books through there.
I have. I've published, maybe about 6 or 7 books, a few floppies and a few trade paperbacks and some hardcovers, using both Crowdfundr and Kickstarter, and Fundraiser at the beginning. But now I'm really focusing on Crowdfundr. I really like their ethos and the platform.
Nice. And Sean.
So I'm Sean Michale Robinson, and I am an accidental publisher, I would say. I am a artist and writer. I had my first book come out in 2010 or 2011, and had an illustration career after that, and then sort of backed into doing pre-press work for Dave Sim, famous Canadian cartoonist, restoring the Cerebus series page by page. And by doing the pre-press work in the way that I did, it was really informed from my own artistic background and being basically like, how do I represent this thing as well as possible on the page? And I got a little bit maniacal about it, maybe a little crazy about it. And through this process, backed into publishing The Strange Death of Alex Raymond last year. And this was a book by Sim and Carson Grubaugh. And, we made it big and heavy enough that you could kill somebody with it, which was, on my list of nice things to do, having books that represent themselves in print as best as possible, books that are like books, and sort of the ethos that I've had since then. This is a new publisher. I mean, we've been around. The first volume came out, or the first book came out in December of 2021. And everything that we've done since then has been sort of guided by the same kind of principle, which is, as an artist, what type of books do I want to see? How extreme can we get this kind of thing? Can you have one person's vision represented on the page as best as possible and have each aspect of it represent the intention as well as possible? And that has not been possible without various crowdfunding efforts. And most of our work so far in that venue has been on Kickstarter, although I'm very excited to hear about Crowdfundr, and I've been very interested to see some of the different platforms that have stepped into some of the niches that are available. But we tend to do this stuff hand in hand with our distribution, which is through Diamond Comics for comic stores and DBD, Diamond's bookstore arm for bookstore places and things like that. So trying to meld these two models into one model when possible, and doing things that, I like to do, which is hopefully what everybody is all on the same page for on this call. Jeff, I know you too are a publisher, and you have similar kinds of tastes, I think, in that you are picking the things that specifically that you want to do, and that's the thing that you're throwing yourself into.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of am in a little bit of your vein, where I kind of backed into publishing more or less because I was really wanting to make my own comics, but also I was seeing a bunch of people around me who I really loved who weren't making comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that they had the skill set to make something really cool. And I kind of just used it as an excuse to force people I knew to make comics. But that's been really, really fun and very rewarding because my one good buddy, John Moretta, I've been publishing all of his comics. Lumpy Slump, the first couple issues. The first issue we did on Kickstarter that was pretty successful. And we also have done some work with Crowdfundr, which has been really good. And I've been in it from a much smaller position, trying to grow upward, getting more into bigger distribution, because most of what I've been doing so far has been really like banging down people's doors and driving around. And they have books in like maybe 40 or 50 stores at this point that I've driven across to various states and across Canada to go to. But that's a pretty tough way to get your books into stores. So
that's a great number though. 40, 50. That's pretty respectable numbers for self-distribution.
The death of a salesman model is still alive and well despite the title.
Yeah, I really figured that, anywhere I'm traveling for any reason, there's no excuse not to have a bunch of copies of my stuff to drop by for anybody interested.
That's about 1/6 of all shops that buy indie books.
Not terrible.
I mean, according to Diamond's numbers,
right.
Like that's actually about 1/6 of the stores that would buy something from the back pages. So
it's interesting how the back pages have been changing over the past decade as well.
Yeah,
they're much bigger, and people are putting in full page ads in the back pages now because they can't afford the front pages, and the people that can't afford the front pages aren't with Diamond anymore.
Right. Have you seen a lot of your distribution change in terms of that, like in terms of your overall percentages going to comic shops versus their overall percentages, either direct sales or, is that a shifting percentage for you?
For me?
Yeah.
We don't ever really sell direct to stores. I worked in a store, and I'll be honest, the worst thing is when a creator calls or a publisher calls for you to carry your books, because, if you work in a store, you kind of know if you can sell the book or not, and you don't really want to, it was a capes and tights store that I worked in. So, it's hard to tell somebody I personally would love to buy 5 copies, but they'll sit here, and I remember, we would do that sometimes because we really liked the art, and then a year or two later, you're dusting down the shelves, and you have to move the 10 retailer backer reward books that you bought and move them to the other side to clean, and then move the 10 retailer backer book awards back. And that was a tough thing, it's hard to sell indie comics through comic book stores. I find that when through some of the imprints that I run, the independent, more artist forward books really do a lot better in bookstores. And that's I think where you're going to get people that are more likely to pick something up that looks interesting, rather than has a name attached to it, which is kind of how the direct market, you kind of have to have that. A lot of times I recognize that name from Thor or from Venom or whatever book this person wrote, and that's kind of their gateway into picking it up. So I think that's one of the toughest things I've found.
How about you, Michelle? You've seen it from both perspectives.
And
in the 90s.
I am completely detached from the traditional distribution model right now. I have had Diamond and Consortium reach out to me to talk about possibilities, and it is frankly overwhelming to even consider that kind of thing. Currently, I'm crowdfunding, I'm printing at a local printer. I mean, a 15-minute drive away. I don't even have the books shipped to me. I get a zip car and go and get them and bring them back to my 2-bedroom apartment and pack. It really is kind of backwards to be in my early 50s and doing things the way I would have probably been doing them in my 20s if I had my choice, to do it really kind of like, grassroots, mail order, indie. So I hear what, I hear about, what Keith is saying about comic shops. The good luck that I've had is a lot of the comic shops, about half of the comic shops that I am currently selling to directly, remember me from the 90s. They're still around. And there are venerable shops like Comics Experience in San Francisco, for example. And I know that all these shops, they are successful with the books that I send them because they do a lot of hand selling.
Right.
And they're enthusiastic about the books. And I realize that there's a limited amount of energy and time. So I feel very fortunate that they are able to give the attention to the books that I am sending them, and hand sell them, grab people as they walk in and say, hey, have you seen Dishman? It was a mini comic in the 80s. Here it is, this collection. You have to buy it. And the person will be like, okay. And then I'll get an email going, oh, I bought this comic. I bought this graphic novel in Austin. What else have you got? Right. So I'm really fortunate in that case.
Well, you've got so much goodwill. I would think, from your time at Black Eye Books. I mean, you guys were really groundbreaking in a lot of different ways.
I'm pleasantly surprised at how long that goodwill lasted, because I was really, around for about 5 years in the 90s. And then I came back in 2019, and to have enthusiasm for the return of a micro press from Canada is just, it's just amazing and humbling. And I have so much gratitude for that. And it shows that, from if I want to feel good about something for myself, it shows that I was good at picking creators to publish back then. And I developed goodwill. And those creators, like Jay Stevens, who I published back in the 90s and who I'm publishing again with Dwellings, they still have an audience. And that was something that was great for him to rediscover, that his audience was still there waiting to read what he wanted to put out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Comic fans are nothing if not loyal.
Yes.
If they like the stuff that you do, they will follow you, and that's really a good beneficial thing. And those shops that you mentioned, that have those reputations, that hand sell, they're in business for a long time because of that reason. Like, that's really the lifeblood of the industry. The shops that can employ enough people to be able to hand sell because they're doing it the right way. Those are the shops I love, and I hope they stick around for 20 more years.
Go ahead.
Well, it seems like there's a relationship between that type of goodwill that a publisher can get and a type of goodwill that an artist can get, and that type of shop. You have a shop like Partners and Sons or Escape Pod Comics, and you just know that as long as the people at Partners and Sons are owning that store, and as long as Menachem is owning Escape Pod Comics, those places are going to be lights for the type of books that we all make and the type of books that we like, because that's all their personalities are running the thing. And similarly, when somebody really likes a book that they publish and they learn to trust your taste, like, oh, hey, I bought 3 books this guy has put out, and all 3 of them were really interesting, or all 3 of them infuriated me in the best kind of way, or all 3 of them were killer in some other, art aesthetic standpoint or whatever. You start to gather that kind of, reputational goodwill. And I think that the 3 things are kind of related, all 3 levels, whether you're talking about a shop or whether you're talking about a publisher or whether you're talking about being an artist. It's a similar kind of thing, and having that long view where you're not trying to screw somebody over. You're not trying to do something the wrong way. You're always trying to do it the right way, is the thing that sustains you through the harder kind of times.
Well, then I would, those are all great points. And I would add to that, shops like Partners and Son, The Beguiling, Drawn and Quarterly, all of those, and I could just go on. If I missed one of the names, there's so many great shops out there. Hank Comics in Amsterdam, they, to me, feel like they are almost like the shop equivalent of a show like TCAF or Cake. You know, they're more of like a comics festival type shop versus a pop culture shop, which is what a lot of the, you know, superhero pops retailers are. And it's nothing against that. It's just a different model. And you're just looking at, you know, finding your audience in those more indie shops that have that, you know, these are people who grew up reading indie comics, or grew up reading Love and Rockets and Fantagraphics books and Drawn and Quarterly. And now they have their own stores and they have their own aesthetic. And a lot of them, you know, pivoted to, say, like a cafe model during pandemic to be able to sell food, to be able to help keep things going. And it all just feeds into this aesthetic. I mean, there's one that's near me called Sidekick, and they were like a bottle shop during the pandemic to help them make it through. They were selling wine and beer. And that, again, feeds into that more independent, kind of almost like a record store vibe. And I find that is really an attractive venue to, you know, get books into.
Yeah. I feel like there's a big perception that a lot of comic book stores are like Cape superhero stores, and that's fine, but there are really quite a lot of comic book stores and like independent bookstores, like places that sell zines, and just like there's a lot of those places, and a lot of the support that I've gotten has been from those places. Yeah, they're out there, but you have to find them. But that said, I think that each of you kind of have you know, some overlap in your audiences, but obviously you have your different audiences. What do you think the primary way has been for you to get your books into the types of stores that we're all talking about? Like,
direct outreach. You know, setting up a mailing list and being a bit bold and kind of doing a little bit of blind emailing, you know, cold calling, as it were, and just kind of keeping in contact, making it attractive for shops to be able to purchase the comics. In my case, at the size that I'm at, sales to shops are a wash. They're not profitable. There's no loss. They're more about outreach, about getting the books out there so that other readers might discover something, and maybe we'll back a later crowdfunded project with some of the bells and whistles. I try to also keep the stuff that's on the crowdfunding a little bit, you know, have it a little bit more heavy with goodies than people could get at a shop. But shops, to me, primarily are about outreach and getting the print runs up so that I might get that next break, right? You know, that next 100 copies where, the price per unit goes down a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
With the beautifully drawn, beautifully printed, beautifully designed book, the book itself is an advertisement for the book. And especially when everybody has can we curse on here? Everybody has a screen with them at all times. I'm surrounded right now by, you know, 2 screens on this side of my room. I got a drawing board behind me where I'm not facing away from the screens. But you're competing with that, and so you have to deliver something that is an advertisement to itself. It says this is a print book. You know, one of the reasons to be obsessive about the print side of it, and one of the reasons that I really went nuts as a line art person, is because I had had the experience of making fine line art and having it come back and look like a big mushy mess, and wondering what happened. You know, why is it that a book that was printed 130 years ago has immaculate line art, and something that's printed today doesn't, unless the person knows what they're doing? Like, these are the types of things that kind of like kept me up at night for a while. And what I kind of come back to is like the object itself is going to sell the object. Like, you get out there and you bring it to a show, or you sell a bunch of copies at half price to somebody who's going to bring it to a show for you, and acts as a sort of micro distributor, or, you know, and the next thing you know, like, you know, you're meeting the person from Partners because because they're at the same show with you, and they walk down the thing and they're like, "Hey, oh, you guys are the ones who did that Yokoyama book? It's crazy. Hey, can we have a box of it?" And every person that gets that, you got to just sort of think this is an advertisement for the next book that you're doing. This is an advertisement for the next book by this cartoonist. Hopefully these relationships are going to continue. This person is hopefully going to make more books. And, we just did we have 2 books coming out in the next couple of weeks, both of which were licensed from a Dutch publisher, Scratch Books in the Netherlands. And they just do fantastic books. They sent me a box of their books, and it's like every single book is beautifully designed, beautifully drawn. Every single book is like an invitation to open. And to me, like when you're competing with the world, with everybody having screens, like that is the objectness of it itself has to be part of the sales pitch. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Michelle. Like I feel like getting it into a shop where people are going to see it, like that in itself is a victory. And is a sort of insurance policy against the book being forgotten,
Yeah. I'd say that both of your books are extremely well designed, and each of you have impeccable taste for sure. I know that I actually was trying to publish A Distant Fire a long time ago, and just that book is beautiful. So, I definitely know that we share similar tastes in that. I will say that the hardest, it's gorgeous. Yeah. The hardest thing for me, like I don't do selling directly to stores any longer, just because of the time and the cost. Like you said, it's a wash kind of like by the time you pack everything, buy your packing supplies, pay for the shipping of the weight to get to each individual store. It's just much easier for me to refocus and say, buy it through Diamond. It's going to come in your in your Tuesday night shipments, and you can just pay one shipping and handle your returns or your damages through Diamond. And then I just have to deal with one outlet. I find that like that's been a bit easier for me financially because, there's only so many. I mean, washes that you can take on a book before, after a while, the admin costs start to rack up and you have other issues you have to worry about, which I think is always the crux of like comic publishing or book publishing in general, which I've done prose books and it's sort of similar.
Well, yeah, there's the old adage, right? How do you make a small fortune in publishing? Start with a large fortune,
with a big one,
and start publishing.
Yeah, it's the easiest way to lose money. And
apparently, no, the easiest way is by Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that like at least one of the things that I'm looking to do now is to try to make the books that are published through my new Friday imprint, which in 2023 we're publishing I Escaped a Chinese Internment Camp, which won the Pulitzer. So that's like the book I'm focusing on the most, and trying to take exactly what you two both said about aesthetics for the book. And I've been really, really lucky that Diamond has been very supportive of that. They've been more supportive of that than any book we've ever published. And understanding that like, okay, maybe we need to take a step back on this book and really look at the function of the book as an object and how do we get this book to last, which is something I never really thought about, that if this book was going to be sold into schools, like for their social studies classes, I have to think about a heavier cardstock cover. I have to think about maybe this has to go hardcover. And what does that mean for the bottom line, like for the actual cost to produce this book? And you have to kind of balance all that together, especially with the cost of printing domestically versus printing overseas, and then the cost to transport. There's a lot of things that like start to add up, and it's always a balancing act. How do you keep it afloat with giving people the best product possible? And so this is my biggest test. I haven't had a hit, I think, like Strange Tales, which I actually own. I bought that thing right off Indigo's shelves here in Toronto. The Strange Death of
Alex Raymond. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I bought right off the shelves. It's beautiful. A stunning book.
Thank you.
So like, how do I get a book that might be as successful as that book as far as like it was everywhere in my comics community. You got to check this book out. Like, how do you put that much effort into a book and make it pay off? Like, that's my real goal. And that's the one I think is the toughest part.
Yeah, and you, like you said, there's so many different things to balance. I mean, Jeff, I've been contacted by a few people who are, in fact, I believe I talked to you before you published, your first book that was on a crowdfunder. And one of the pieces of advice I gave you, or at least I should have if I didn't, is, learn how to use a spreadsheet. Just being able to do basic functions on a spreadsheet and be able to say, okay, if I do this, if I make the price this point, here's the amount of profit I can expect on the entire print run. If I make the price this point, and all you have to do is change one number, and the spreadsheet is doing all the work for you. I was very, very fortunate before Strange Death came out. Ted Adams, who is a really great guy and an incredible, boon to our industry. He founded IDW many years ago and is now the head of Clover. He was kind enough to give me a lot of his time, and he sent me a spreadsheet of a book he was working on currently. And I use that as a model to sort of how to build out these types of things, because I'd never thought about any of these things before. It's all aesthetics to me. And I remember having this conversation with a retailer who wanted to buy these directly from me, and the retailer just said, "You're making the book too big. I'm not gonna stock as many because it's too big and it's gonna cost too much, and I'm not gonna put it on my normal shelf." And I had to tell the guy, like, well, it's gonna be more readable this way. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter. You're a business person when you're a publisher, and it doesn't matter anyway. But those are the voices that you have to have in your head, But anyway, like something as simple as, am I gonna print in China or am I gonna print in Canada? Mm-hmm. And you might pay 60% of what you would pay to print in Canada to print in China. On the other hand, 20% of that is going to shipping fees. It's going to take a minimum of 6 weeks to arrive at you. The ethical considerations are significant. Somebody who's working at a print plant in Canada, you have a reasonable expectation of what their working conditions are. And you can see photos from the floor. You can even go visit the plant while they're running the book if you want to. And if you work with a printer that's right across the border, like I do, Marquis Imperator, I don't know how to pronounce. They're right across the border from a diamond warehouse. I mean, they don't have to ship at all. I mean, I might pay $150 because they load it on the back of a truck, and they drive a truck across the border and they drop it off at the diamond warehouse. Yep. So, for a lot of books, that ends up being the way to go, but you really have to plan each of these things out. And you might think, okay, I'm going to save a few bucks and print in China, but then you're going to have to do it blind. You're going to have to do it before you get any orders in, because it's going to be 3 or 4 months out from when you do it. And so, are you prepared to print 4,000 copies of a book that you might sell 400 of?
Yeah, that's the timing is something that people don't really understand, is that the markets are different. The timing of the book market and the timing of the comic market are months apart. So if you really want to, which is why we always talk about runway for printing, and you better have the cash on hand for a lot of this stuff if you really want to do it the right way, because in order to get your book into a bookstore the same day it hits, or usually it's like a Tuesday before or after, if you want to align them as best as you can, you have to have that book printed way before you really do know your final sales numbers, because or at least you have to have it pretty locked at that point. And print numbers are always, I think people really overestimate print run numbers, like when they're talking about how much a book does or something. And if you just read the antitrust lawsuit in the States from the big 5 publishers, I think a lot of people can finally understand that there's authors and numbers, and then there's everybody else, and it's below the basement. So it's the idea that that you can take that risk and do 4,000 units is that would put you probably on a bestsellers list in the prose world. It's surprising. It's surprising. And we haven't seen, just on another industry level. I mean, you guys are talking about the print as the object, which is, I think in comics where we're at now, it's got to be this art piece almost. But the book industry, with unlimited Kindle reading and ebook proliferation in the market, that is really beneficial, especially for a lot of authors that can sell different kinds of work that people maybe wouldn't buy to put on their bookshelf.
Or wouldn't read on the subway because
exactly,
of the title or the cover. Yeah.
Hey,
And we just don't, digital comics still in 2023, we have a massive pushback from our own industry about where comic fans are so anti-digital that they're definitely afraid that it's going to like somehow ruin the industry. So you have a separate parallel market of like webtoons from Korea coming up, and it is not, they don't speak to each other, you know, and that's where all those numbers, when you look at the industry numbers, it's a $2 billion industry, but it's not. It's Scholastic over here, you know, and it's webtoons over here, and it's like Western comics down here, you know.
Yeah, take a look at Dave Pilkey's numbers and subtract them from the total, because he's the size of North American comics. I mean, you know, and God bless him. I mean, I'm not downplaying his amazing, you know, contributions. Those kids are the future. You know, the kids who are reading Cat Kid Comic Club are the kids who are going to be making graphic novels, you know, in a number of years. But you got it. You're right. If you just take and you just lop off the top, you know, subtract all the Muria Berserk fans, and I mean, not to say that those people don't buy other comics, but you got to subtract out those big ones and just accept that that's essentially winning a lottery ticket at this stage of likelihood.
Well, I would chime in on the production side of things a little bit with practical advice. When you were talking about spreadsheets, other practical advice is communicate with your printer, especially, you know, if you have a great relationship with your printer, they will help you make your book a success. Early on, when I was getting quotes for my very first crowdfunded project, I had it as a slightly larger than 6x9, or maybe even just 6x9. And I got a quote. I thought, okay, this is what I got to work with. And I got a nice email from the sales rep going, hey, you know, if you make it smaller than 6x9, you're going to save $1,000. So basically a third of my print cost. And so I looked at the content, discussed it with the artist, did a couple of tests with the laser printer. Like, yeah, this would work at 5.5 by 8 3/4 or whatever. And that became like the magic size that I try to use for a lot of books when I'm doing a graphic novel, is make it smaller than 6x9, because if it works in that size, then we're saving a ton on printing. We're also saving a ton on shipping, which, granted, it's not something that we pay for directly, but it means that it's a more attractive price for somebody who's backing a project. I try to keep shipping as close to the actual cost as possible, because it just feels yucky to not do so. And it's been something that my crowdfunding patrons have remarked upon. People in the UK going, oh, I can actually back this project in Canada, and it's not going to be like $30 shipping for a floppy. They like that. And there are services like in the States, like Pirate Ship, or in Canada, Stallion and Chit Chats, that give you access to discount shipping. It is great, and also a little disheartening to be able to ship media mail in the States and also see that, oh, I can ship something to the UK for less than I can within Canada.
Yeah. You guys are, I'm sorry to say, I mean, you guys have a very tough postal situation.
It is.
Right now.
It is tough. But it's not untenable. It's just kind of a little bit eye-opening when you see that shipping overseas with a shipping partner is cheaper than, you know, sending something across town.
Yeah. And a Pirate Ship is now. And my friend Tom Kaczynski, who is the head of Uncivilized Books, who's doing the new Craig Thompson series, has pointed out to me that if you're in the U.S., there are also even further reduced postal rates that you can get by obeying certain USPS postal conditions, which seem crazy to me. It's like, you know, you stamp it yourself. You get a certain kind of, you know, there's all these different things that he has done to make his shipping dirt cheap.
Media mail is great. Media mail is like the best.
Right. It really is, but it can get even further down that if you're willing to obey certain
That's
conventions.
Amazing.
And I'm not willing to do that yet because our books are big and heavy. as of yet. And for me, when the price point, for instance, Strange Death of Alex Raymond was $40, I am willing to eat that cost for shipping domestically. So, given the fact, sure, I'm going to package it myself or have the team of people do it with me if we're doing it all at the same time. Okay, given that I'm going to spend $1.50 on the box plus the bubble wrap plus the tape or whatever, given the fact that it's going to be $5 to ship it, I'll still go ahead and just roll that into the cost of a campaign when it's domestic. Because for me personally as a consumer, when I see that number go up $10 or whatever, I just think, I just can't do it. And that's the difference between me buying a book that looks interesting on a crowdfunder campaign and me not buying a book because I'm already paying $40 for it. And, as a publisher, a book sells $40 and me and the creators, if we sell it directly, we're going to end up getting, 20 bucks worth of 50% profit by selling it directly. And, that is not what's happening if I'm selling it through Diamond,
That's for sure.
A reasonable deal that you might get as a small publisher through Diamond would be that they are going to be paying you 40% of the retail price. And so every calculated decision that you make is going to have to be with that in mind. And, as a consumer too, if you're listening to this, you buy direct if the publisher sells direct. If you really like the publisher, that is short of going out and proselytizing for the book and having a sign on a table, this is the best thing that you can do in terms of, making your money go directly into the publisher's hands. That being said, this is a symbiotic relationship. People get your book because they see it. Getting it into as many places as possible is fantastic. There's nothing like the thrill of going into a library and finding a book that you published or a book that you drew or something like that. I'm not downplaying those experiences. I'm just saying that the direct sales are the thing that oftentimes makes it profitable in a situation where otherwise you wouldn't make any money on it.
Well, that's the whole appeal of some crowdfunding platforms like Crowdfundr, is that you're basically setting up a pre-order portal. You are Diamond.
Right.
You are selling directly to consumers, and you are, I did a little bit of kind of not heavy spreadsheet look, but some quick spreadsheet looks. And basically we need to sell, depending on the type of project, between a floppy or a trade paperback, you need to sell between 5 and 10 times the amount to get the same profit for the artist. Right. For them to have the same payday, they would need to be selling 5 to 10 times as much through stores or through Diamond and to stores. So selling directly to people is really modern patronage. They are supporting the project.
Yeah, and you don't really need a lot of people to make that happen. You really need I was watching The Founder not that long ago, and at the end it says, McDonald's feeds 1% of the world's population, which is a big boast, but 1% is a small number. But it just goes to show you don't really need a lot. You don't need a big percentage in order to get a lot of support. But Keith, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on a lot of this, because you do work with some fancier books, but also you do a lot of work with Floppies, and you kind of have your thumbs in a lot of pies. So
yeah, I don't currently do crowdfunding right now, just because it's not something that I've really thought would be beneficial, more so because it's another thing to operate. It's another thing to run full time kind of. And but with TPub in the UK, we do run Kickstarters, so I'll be working kind of doing that and figuring out how to function that. I definitely have my own thoughts about from analyzing a lot of crowdfunding, in that there's an average amount of backers per Kickstarters of different types of things that range between 125 to 250. There's some that get even more people, 400, 1,000. But what I find when I look at kind of the numbers and analyze it is that a lot of patrons, really is what it is, modern art patronage, pay way more than MSRP for these books. And that's really what you're kind of counting on in crowdfunding, is you're counting on somebody with a lot of disposable income to pay way, way more to get a book that would be significantly cheaper at a bookstore, and also get some a t-shirt and buttons and stickers and a poster or whatever. And, you know, you're rewarding them with things to make them feel like they've helped bring this book to life. And I think that's a really rewarding thing for fans, to feel that sort of connection. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that, like, I have noticed that if something does get Kickstarted or crowdfunded or whatever, that you've taken the core fans, like your guaranteed sales that would have pre-ordered the book from Barnes and Noble, Indigo, Amazon, or their local comic book store, and you've removed them from the market and you've sold directly to them. So all your sales figures, like your day one sales figures, like you have to realize that you are removing yourself from that in a way, that it's just a different thing at that point. Like you can't get on like a bestsellers list if all of your sales are really through like a Kickstarter at first, right? Because you don't have any sales being tracked through like BookScan and all like the different metrics that they use to like judge publishing. But again, does that even really matter? Right? Like that's really the question. The question is, does it matter? And realistically, if what matters is, can we put a book out in the world and can the artist and the publisher not lose money on it? That's really the bottom line. Like, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think if you go on Crowdfundr or Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of the number of sites out there to put your work out, as long as you're not negative by the time you get done with it, then I think you did a darn good job. You know, like to me, that's really the one thing I always try to tell people is that, like, as long as you know what you need to not lose money, you know, because it's really easy to lose money.
I talked to somebody before Strange Death, when we were in the planning stages of Strange Death. I talked to somebody at Diamond. I won't say their name because they didn't give me permission to relay the comments, but somebody who is fairly high up in their infrastructure. And I just said, point blank, I can't sign a distribution contract unless you know that I'll be doing crowdfunding. And we talked about that as a serious matter. And it was this person's opinion anyway, that there were right ways and wrong ways to do it. And he personally saw it that there are people who just prefer to buy their books directly from the people, and there are people who prefer to not leave their house, which was his words. That probably makes up some percentage of the people who buy strictly on a certain platform, whether they're Crowdfundr people or Indiegogo people or whatever. There are people who this is their new delivery mechanism, and they just scan the little title card and they say, okay, there we go. I want this at my house. I want a book plate that comes with it from the artist that's signed or whatever. And I can't do that to their bookshop. I can't send a bunch of book plates to Diamond and ask them to please adhere them on the way to Escape Pod Comics or whatever. So if you sort of keep in mind that you've got all these things happening simultaneously, I think there are better and worse ways to do that. One of the things that I've always done so far anyway is we have never opened a crowdfunding platform for a book before the solicitation period is open at a comic shop. And so our crowdfunders have always lagged by a few days the previous catalog coming out, so that retailers have a chance to look at it first. People have a chance to do that. And, we lose out, I'm sure, crowdfunding wise because of that. But you know what? For me, I'm calculating that we're going to sell 10% of our books directly to people through a crowdfunder. And the other 90% are going to go out in the world and be ambassadors for the artist and be ambassadors for hopefully the line of books. And that balance makes sense to me. And, sure, if it sounds crazy and it sounds upside down, but if I wanted to make the maximum amount of money on every project, I probably would do it exclusively. And then 6 months later, only the hits would get solicited. And that would be
that is so nice of you to do that, to solicit it first in Diamond for everybody. Like, it just from a personal standpoint, because it gives the comic shops a chance, right, with their regulars to help them go through a good shop will take a customer through previews.
Right.
And it really gives them a chance to support their local comic shop. And it also allows them to go home and say, well, maybe I actually just want to support, I get my pull file, I get my weekly book money. Maybe I want to go and support directly. And also you're upfront about it. Cause I got to say, I've a pretty expensive book on Kickstarter, and then after the book got, its 6-figure funding, they announced like, oh yeah, and it's coming out through Image, and I was so pissed because it was like double the money, because I was like, I want to support this, like, oh, I could have saved like $50, which is a lot of money. I'm not trying to shame anybody that does it, but the upfrontness about it, I think, is nice, because Kickstarter, like, you do spend a little bit more because there is that patronage aspect, right? Like, you want to make sure that this book gets made. You want to make sure that all the fans get to read it and we get to experience it. So having it be very upfront about that, I think, is a really honorable thing. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks. It didn't really occur to me to do it in any different way. And part of that is just because, like, the first book I did, like I said, was Dave Sim was the artist on most of it. And he's a person who has cultivated a relationship with a smaller pool of people than he had at his peak. He had a book that sold, 28,000 copies, 30,000 copies at the peak in 1986 or 1987 or whatever, and was probably selling 4,000 or 5,000 copies by the last issue. But he's somebody who has weathered those changes and said, okay, well, this is my core base. These people are the people who really want to support me. I give them opportunities to support me, but I never put any pressure on them. And, looking at his sort of model for that, he takes care of the people that support him. He does his best to give them the thing that he said he's going to give them. I've just taken notes. I have a lot of opportunity to sort of observe that up close and see, like, what is somebody who's very successful at this. And and it makes sense to me, because, like, frankly, like, those people are the people who, if you have backed one of our Kickstarters, like, you are the reason that this book exists. And you're helping us get it out to the broader world. And I think that those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Which is part of the reason why I really wanted to have this conversation, even though I'm, like everybody here on the call, crazy busy, because being a publisher is a nightmare of logistics and, making sure that everything happens at the right time and not the wrong time. And that sinking feeling that you feel when you missed a deadline for something and something's going to come out 6 weeks later, because you didn't send an email, but because people who want to publish, I'm just, whether you're an artist or whether you're representing an artist, like, make your commitments, and make sure that, like you said, Keith, like, that you're upfront about the things that you're planning on doing. And we always have that language explicitly in each of our campaigns. This is going to pay for the print run of this book, which is also available from your local comic shop. And I put the links in the campaign. Here's how you can order it from your local comic shop. The Diamond has a thing where you can just put what city you live in and you get a list of the comic shop. I always use that utility because, these places need to be supported. And like you said, Keith, like, people have relationships already with the store, and they might have relationships with that particular owner. They might have a pull file already. They need to keep on having those relationships, or we're going to all end up selling 15 books to each other at $1,000 a piece.
Oh yeah, there is that thing of the crowdfunding cycle of, like, I back your book, you back mine, and then eventually you're like several $100s a month, people asking for backing. I've seen some funny conversations about. I will say, Jeff, to your question about Floppies, before I have to jump off, Floppies, they're the life of the industry, and that's what a comic book is. But they are the most fiscally irresponsible thing in the industry right now.
Yes.
The cost to print at any reasonable rate for a size of a run now, like if Cerebus was selling 4,000 units towards the end, that would be about the minimum of what you need now to break even, basically. By the time you get all your admin costs, because people tend to look at, if Diamond is giving you 40% and this is what the book costs, well, then that's profit. And so it doesn't work that way. That's not profit. And it's really, really difficult. I know, Jeff, you did some floppies for one of your books, the Canadian crime book that I have, which is great. It's very difficult, and you got to be really creative. And realistically, floppies exist now because you have to, in some respects. I've been really trying to look at how you do floppies almost direct to order, where it's kind of like, what's the order coming in, and that's what we're printing. And if we lose money on that, then we have to lose money on it. We'll eat it. We'll figure out a way to eat the money, because maybe the next one will have a little bit of profit on it. But you get stuck in that cycle of floppies, and it's very difficult to get out of it. It's to me, the scariest part of the industry is the floppies, because a lot of indie comic publishers, they're fans. When Thomas got his job at Marvel, he ushered in this new wave of reader to professional, and comic fans have become professionals and publishers, and they expect something. And what they really want, a lot of them, this is not really like what we publish all the time, the people here, but they want a floppy on a rack on Wednesday. Like that's when you've made it, right? So a lot of small publishers that might watch this, or people crowdfund their book, like that's their only goal. And if that's your goal, then there's good ways to do that, but it's tough. You're almost better off to get into graphic novels, just because if you can get the size right, like you were saying, like if you can get that right size, and if you can get the book to look good, you might be able to sell that book for years.
Right.
And unfortunately, those floppies have a shelf life of 6 days.
Yeah.
Days before it's in the bin, and the bins only get larger. I mean, it's the back bins. So it's tough.
The only real ways I've seen that people are making it happen at the level that we're talking about right now are like having some type of almost trick with either the physical aspect of it or the delivery mechanism. And not to call you out, Jeff, but when I saw Canadian Crime Comics and I saw, he sourced real newsprint, and it's like this really thin newsprint, and I immediately thought, this is a genius idea, because Jeff he's taken something and applied like somebody's nostalgic filter to the cheaper thing. Like Jeff's project is feels like nostalgic when you're reading it, but it also costs a fraction of what it would cost if you're printing on a normal web printed stock, I would imagine.
Although I would imagine, Jeff, and just for people to know, like the hacks, your minimum though for newsprint is high, right?
Yeah. My minimum was 1,000 issues, and I ended up doing 2,000 issues per book that I've done, which was, so I did 2,000 of Lumpy Slump, number 1 and 2, and did 2,000 of Canadian Crime. And I did all of those at once, which was 6,000 books, which basically how it worked out was basically all of my profit from the Canadian Crime and Lumpy Slump 1 campaign went into also printing Lumpy Slump 2, because I could get a much better print price break. And it's to the point now where, anytime I'm selling copies, it's pretty good. But I had to put a lot up on, you're paying for 6,000 copies of 3 different books all at once. It was a little bit hairy making all of that work. But I don't know if that's actually the one thing that I would caution anybody wanting to get into publishing, is that if you're uncomfortable with dealing with large amounts of money coming and going in a very quick period, that's something you have to get used to a little bit doing publishing. Pay a lot. There's
no the amount of emails and phone calls I've gotten over the years from somebody is like, there's got to be a hack to this, right? Like there's got to be a way to only print like what I need for like a little bit of money. And it's like, I don't think there is. If there was, we'd all be doing it. Right?
There is, but you got to stay small.
Yeah.
Like there is, and it that's where I'm at right now. I'm at the place where I'm printing digital. Mm-hmm. I'm printing my floppies with high-speed inkjet, which happens to work for the aesthetic of the books that I'm doing.
There you go.
The blacks are not deep, but it works for Jay's comic. It looks like an old comic, and it looks right for what he's doing. So we pretty much print to order for every campaign that we do, with a little bit of extra. And the unit cost is workable. The unit cost is around $2 for a full color 36-page comic. And that's, starting at around a print run of 300 or 400, and that gives us that break of $2. Below that, it goes up a little bit more, but with a cover price of $6.66, there's still some leeway, especially if we're selling direct to consumer.
Yeah.
But essentially, I'm a fancy mini comic publisher right now. I'm making fancy mini comics, and I'm putting them out to anywhere between 500 and 1,000 people per campaign. And that is doable. And then there's like a medium place where you're more than that, but you're not big enough for, 10,000 copies. And it's that I think the small press, like the micro press, like I'm doing, is doable now. It's the medium place where you're not huge yet, but you've now got a spring for full color printing.
This is making me
overseas
uncomfortable.
or something.
Yeah, no, it's you're right.
I've been looking at that medium place, and I'm like, well, I can't actually find printers that'll do much cheaper than my current printer.
No, probably not until you get into large numbers.
Unless you're getting into 10,000.
Yeah. Like it's kind of scary because like even at $2, like for a 36 pager, which is that Canadian or US? I assume it's
Canadian.
Yeah. So like that's really good, but it's still like to go through distribution.
It doesn't work for distribution.
It doesn't work, right?
It would be a wash for distribution. If I sold through Diamond, it would just be another version of outreach. And then you wonder, well, how much outreach am I doing? Like how many copies are we just giving away? Right. Can't give away 2,000 copies.
Exactly.
So the thing that you hit on there that I wanted to just kind of underline is the aesthetics fitting with this. And I'm just going to toss this idea out for free. Anyone is free to use this. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I have a Brother laser printer underneath my desk right now. So 2 feet away from me that I paid $200 for. I can refill the ink for $20, or even cheaper if I'm willing to use a syringe to do it myself. And it will do thousands of impressions, and it will look better than almost any short-run digital print in terms of line art only. It will look better than most short-run digital processes for the line art. If you are the type of person who really likes to do these things and be in control of these things yourself, the very cheapest, astounding, excellent looking thing you can do is run all your line art off on the laser printer and make some type of stamp for another second color. Something along those lines. Get a second, quote unquote, color laser printer that you can feed a color drum into, and then do a second pass at all of this stuff. There were so many different ways. I mean, make a potato stamp comic. If it fits with your aesthetic, there are ways to do this so that you are doing it yourself. You're not taking this and siphoning off and putting it on to somebody else. And that's a big part of being a publisher, is figuring out which of these things am I actually going to do myself, and which of these things fit with the book that I particularly want to make, and which of these things should be pushed off to somebody else. I mean, the only reason that I can do the stuff that you guys are talking about, the publisher that gets just a little bit bigger like that, the only reason I can do the things that I'm doing right now, which are, we have 4 books coming out in the next 4 months, which is absolutely insane. Please don't do this if you are starting out. This is a scheduling nightmare. I didn't mean
ever.
Right. Yeah. We just had too many trains going into the same location, right? And they all had to kind of get in line.
I think every single person I know who I've talked about that you come up, every person has been like, how is he doing this?
Well, I'll give you the secret right now. Okay. So I know how to do all of the things that are involved in a publication. I don't have to farm out the lettering. I don't have to farm out the text adaptation, because I've done, I'm a writer, I'm a published author. I don't have to farm out the design. I don't have to farm out the copywriting. I don't have to farm out the copy editing, although I probably should. Each of these things are things that I've done in some capacity on past projects. And so I've been stupid enough to combine all of those skills simultaneously on the past few things. And I wouldn't recommend it even if you know how to do all those particular things. It just happens to be the thing that I can do in order to get through this gauntlet that I've set up for myself here. And, the gauntlet is partly financial, because of course, each of these times that you're paying, you have to get terms with your printer. If you've been printing with a place for a long period of time, if you have an existing relationship with the printer, like I do with one particular printer that I work with, I've been working with them for like 6 or 7 years. So I have a large credit with them. They are willing to print I can wait for 30 days before I pay. If I want to wait another 30 days, I pay an extra 1.5%, which not a big deal, right?
Oh, it's a great deal.
So
I'd have to jump.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, Keith.
No, it's all good. Guys, thank you so much. I'm actually a fan of both of your work. So this was wonderful to sit and talk with both of you guys. And just anybody out there wanting to crowdfund, make more comics. The world needs more of them.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And don't forget to check out, Keith, where can people buy your comics right now?
Oh, any local comic book store, just go in and ask for the previews, flip to the back. TPub from the UK will be mostly focusing right now on getting those books back into the stores. They have kind of been in and out recently. So we're going to try to refocus on that in 2023. That's kind of why they brought me on. And then if you enjoy reading interesting stories from new voices, check out Lev Gleason's New Friday imprint. And this year, I Escaped a Chinese Internment Camp, 2022 Pulitzer Prize winner. That's coming out this summer, hopefully. And we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And you guys have an amazing range of stuff in the Lev Gleason library too. So, I mean, really incredible stuff, and people who are interested in the history of comics. And
check out American Daredevil. It was an Eisner nominee in 2021. Brett Dakin wrote that. It's a phenomenal look at the original publisher of Lev Gleason himself. So thank you so much. And again, comics is very hard, but it's very rewarding if you can do it. So. All right. Thanks again, guys.
Great to meet you, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
Bye.
I feel like I was on the verge of making a point after having built up to it way too long. I'm sorry. Anybody remember what it was?
Your point was kind of about, do-it-yourselfism.
Yeah, I mean, you can find yourself in the position of doing all of those things, and I would just caution people to really make sure that they are things that you've done before under lower stakes. Because if you find yourself, you think to yourself, oh, okay, well, I know how to do pre-press, or I know how to adjust images for print, because I made a sign for my wife one time. And then you get the book back for the first time, and the entire thing is a pixelated mess because you didn't, none of the files remained attached to the InDesign document before you exported or whatever. I mean, that's not the position, that's not the time that you want to find out that you didn't actually know how to do the task. So it really is a balance between figuring out which of these things you want to do yourself, which of these things you can put into the hands of a trusted person who hopefully you can pay to do that thing. But yes, to answer your question, Jeff, the reason I've been able to do these things is because I can actually do those things myself, which has meant an awful lot less drawing and a lot less of my freelance illustration, which is basically 100% of what I was doing before. But so far, anyway, I feel like I'm building towards something really worthwhile, where really worthwhile projects are coming out as a result of this. But, I miss the drawing board. And although, as far as the oncoming robot apocalypse goes, perhaps I chose the right time to quit freelance illustration. So,
with all of this other stuff that you've been doing, like this AI book that you've been doing, which is very interesting. People have it's the perfect time for that to drop, because you announced it kind of right before the internet kind of exploded about it.
Yeah, we Carson Grubaugh was the co-author of The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, and the two of us got into Midjourney in advance of its public release, and both of us, the first time we used it, were just like, this is going to kill all image making by human beings. And it might take 3 months or it might take 3 years, but this is going to be it. And so Carson immediately made what, as far as we know, is the first comic series that was entirely illustrated by AI. We did this back in June. This is The Abolition of Man #1, which was the first of 4 experiments that we did. And it's been published as a miniseries, which, as Keith alluded to, was a financial disaster. It is very, very hard to make a floppy series work, even when the robots who do the illustration don't desire compensation. It is still a very, very tough thing to make work, just from a purely pragmatic standpoint, just because the numbers have to be so high in order to make that work. But the experiment itself is really about reflecting upon this moment where we are essentially seeing the purpose of lots and lots, huge swaths of human activity disappear? And can you make art that is engaged with that as a concept using the thing that's going to make you obviated, that's going to eliminate you? It's a very intense series that people have been physically repulsed by when they walk by and start to flip through it, and you can just see somebody back up from it, because you feel like you're kind of communicating with an alien intelligence. It's very different from reading a book that was made by a human being, when you're making something that the images are entirely the responsibility of an schizophrenic, algorithm that has no sense of hierarchy of image, and draws a human face in the same way that you or I might draw an avocado.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that I think everything that you're saying about it is partly why I brought it up, is that part of what you kind of need to be a publisher is this ability to be able to marry a concept with the medium that you deliver the concept to people in. So with that, with AI, with this whole concept of will it replace artists, but then using that in an artistic way to try to, comment on this thing. But that similar type of idea is in a lot of, your Plaza book has very, very different design sensibilities, but it's completely, for what it needs to be. And similar with Michelle, with the Collected Milkman, or with Dwellings, like each project is very, very different. If you were to line up each of your books all on a shelf, it would all be different sizes, which is really great.
Almost all. Although Jay's collections, all of the collections that Jay is doing are the same size. We have that in mind for people who might want to put those on a shelf. But all the other things are different sizes.
That's great. So with all that in mind, I guess it really, really quickly, from concept to completion, what's something interesting comes across your path, like a reprint project or an artist you really like, or a concept you really, really want to go with. For people who are wanting to get into this, what's your bullet points of what you need to do before your project is? I know it's a pretty big and open-ended and exhausting question, but
I'd love to hear you, Michelle, what it looks like for you.
Well, one of the first things I will do is there's actually a print front end. A lot of people call it a printer, but it's actually a print broker called Mixem.
Yeah, fantastic.
And they it seems like all of the printers that they kind of job out to use HP Indigo, which is probably the gold standard of digital printing for their lower print runs, and then they'll print on a Heidelberg press for the larger print runs. So the quality is there. But what I'll do initially is, since they have their quoting options are free, I'll just go and do I'll just generate a quick quote there for like what this project is looking like. Oh, okay, it's looking like it's gonna be about 160 page book, color, roughly this size. And then I can get an immediate look at, okay, this is how feasible this is at this print run. Can we make 200 or 300 of these and sell them and I generally, my weird pricing is times 2.7 seems to be about the sweet spot for a graphic novel. The print cost times 2.7. Does that feel close to what somebody would pay for it in a bookstore? Usually that's around the magic number. And then I get like a good idea of like, okay, this is feasible. This is something that we could actually do. And that's like the first hurdle of, is this something that could work? Before I kind of say the final yes to a cartoonist about working together on a project or saying, yes, let's go forward. And then from that, you just start building out. You start building out like, okay, well, there's other calculators online where you can be like, okay, so now I've got this. How much would it cost to ship? So you can go online and you can find, Google calculate weight of book, and you'll find, I can't even remember which publisher it is or which printer it is. It might be, it doesn't matter. You Google it, you find it, you put in your numbers. It says, this is how much a book of that paper weight and that thickness will be. So then you can start plugging in some numbers of like, okay, how much is it going to cost to ship? Does that seem feasible? Yeah, okay, that's feasible. And then from then you can start building out a crowdfunding campaign and roughing something out. And what's great about Crowdfundr is you can clone previous campaigns. You can clone something similar and then just start adjusting from there. But it's really about getting those first numbers and making sure that they make sense, because, you know, it's great to have super fans, and there are super fans who will pay a premium for, say, a hardcover version of J. Stevens' Jet Cat at $75. But not everything can be $75. Some things have to kind of fall within the realm of what they would expect to play at a bookstore at full retail, not like a Chapters Indigo 40% off, but the full retail cost. And as long as that is all making sense, and there's going to be enough money left over for the creator, I kind of operate in almost like a reverse publishing way of doing things. I almost operate like a gallery. I take a 10% cut, and the rest all goes to the cartoonist, the creator afterwards. So, you know, I want to make sure that they are getting proper remuneration for their work. And if it's something like, say, Mundane Adventures of Dishman, where John published this all in the 80s, he made his money from the mini comic. He's just flattered that people are interested in it. Then you know that, okay, well, we can print 30 of them if that's all that happens, and get them out to the people who want them, and everybody's happy. It's mostly, for me, it's about making sure that everybody is getting what they would want out of a project, and doing those initial assessments to make sure that that is feasible. And there are so many great tools online where you can get a good idea of where you stand without even like calling a printer yet.
Yeah, and the more that you get a relationship with the printer, you know, you ask them for quotes and things like that. And the advantages of something like that, if you get to that stage, is that they know what a pain in the ass you're going to be, and they know what type of pain in the ass you're going to be, hopefully. And they have accepted that at some point, and they know, okay, so if I screw up in this way, he's going to threaten us and call us every day until we fix it. And if we screw up in this other way, he's going to be lenient. But that being said, Mixam is a fantastic, like you said, digital print broker service. And another advantage to Mixam is if you are in the States, you go to mixam.com. If you want to print in Canada, you go to mixam.ca, and you can do that even if you are in the States. And so you can cheat that system very easily. And if you have Confederates on one side of the border, and it makes more sense for you to just print on one side and send that to somebody who's going to ship out from Canada than it does to ship internationally, sometimes that makes sense. I have done that with promo copies of books. So when we're doing a book it's going to come out 6 months from now, I want to build some kind of buzz. I might print 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 copies of it and send out to key people that I want to get their evaluation, or I want them to blurb the book, or whatever it is. I might print it on the other side of the border and have those sent out from there. Similarly, if you're in the United States, I would definitely recommend checking out Printing Center USA, which is a similar service, except for it's an actual, several locations. And sometimes they're competitive with Mixam, and definitely on the quality side, they're a little bit higher overall. Just edge them out a little bit. It's some of the Mixam jobs I've just gotten irritating things where they didn't follow the directions, which makes sense when you think about them as a broker service.
That's the one thing that I would say is about Mixam is you have to be prepared to really monitor what they're doing and to call them out when it right. happens. I had my entire run of Dishman printed on stock that was, I think, 3 levels up. Like it was supposed to be printed on 70 pound. They printed on 100 pound. The printer is probably thinking, no, they're going to be happy. It's better paper. And I'm looking at it going, great. So now I have to pay this much more shipping, and we crowdfunded for this amount. Now it's going to be more expensive. But to their credit, I pointed that out, and they credited me. They refunded me the difference in the shipping that I caused. And they initially, you have to really kind of get into customer service mode and be firm but polite. They were
expect saying, 3 interactions.
Oh my gosh, more than 3. In this case, they initially denied it. They said, "You're basically mini gaslighting of like, no, you got the paper that you're supposed to." I'm like, look, I'm weighing the book. It is more than it's supposed to be. And they finally acquiesced and said, "Yep, there was some paper that was mislabeled," and so they ran it with that. I don't believe that. I think that basically there was a printer going, we don't have any 70-pound. Use this 100-pound. It's a paper shortage. They'll love it. To their credit, the spine was fine. Like, even though the book was quite a bit thicker than it should have been, they actually realigned the spine and everything worked out great, so that it wasn't a terrible, it wasn't a disaster. It was just a little bit of a, I'm not too happy about that. And one other time I printed some postcards and they printed the backs upside down on the postcards, which isn't, again, a big deal. But when I pointed it out, they gave me a discount. So yeah, with Mixem, if you're going through them, I would suggest putting in your notes when you send off a job, please follow specs exactly. So at least if you go back afterwards and say, hey, this wasn't followed, you've got something. The other gotcha with Mixem that I've seen from some other people is they reserve the right to increase the prices like after you send the job. Whereas most printers, they will send you like a quote and they'll say, this quote is good for 90 days. And so you send the job within the 90 days and it's great. You send it after the 90 days. Well, you need to get a new quote. But with Mixem, if their paper suppliers put the price up after they've received your job and while they're printing it, you will just get a bill for the difference. And that can be eye-opening. So I would just put that kind of caution in there too. And it's actually it's spelled out very clearly in their table, in their terms and conditions. But who reads all of those terms and conditions?
Throwing that out there too. Similarly, if you go to the point where you're talking to a printer that prints, offset or whatever, and they tell you something on the phone, that is totally worthless. You should always follow up any phone call that you have with the printer with an email that reiterates all of the things that you got out of the conversation, so that you have some kind of tacit agreement between the two of you, because presumably they would correct you if you said something in error. Because when you do end up having some kind of disaster, which you keep on printing, you're eventually going to have something where something arrives that's completely unacceptable to the point where you don't feel as a representative of the artist that you can sell the thing as a representative of their work. You are going to be placed in the position of having to argue that they are the ones who did the thing that is wrong. And the easier it is for you to demonstrate that, and the easier it is for their bosses to acquiesce and say, okay, well, I guess we're, going to fix this thing. We had a misprint situation with The Strange Death of Alex Raymond that involved them reprinting the entire print run of the book, which is a very large print run for a very large book. And it took me weeks to get them to do this thing. And that was some of the most stressful time of my entire life. And I was completely in the right. Everything I gave them a forensic analysis of the files that they sent. And I said, this is what happened. So whoever was working pre-press on Friday on this date is the person who did this thing. And it didn't matter that I knew I was right, because it had to go up every single stage of every chain, part of the chain, until the owner of the company had to sign off and say, fine, you guys screwed up. We're going to pay for this. And, it probably cost them, I don't even want to know, $15,000, $20,000 for this one mistake that their person made. But it was their mistake. It was not my mistake. It was not the artist's mistake. It was not somebody else's mistake.
To suffer for that.
Right, exactly. And we have
people need to hear that.
And that's why they call it a contract proof. When you get a proof, even a digital proof, and an item is appearing in the proof, it's called a contract proof, because your contract is, you have signed off on this. This is what the book is going to look like, guys. And when an item appears on the proof and doesn't appear in print, guess what? Guess who's responsible? It's not you. But you have to have a certain amount of sophistication with these kinds of things, and just remember that at all times, that this is a business agreement that you have with you and these people. And if they say something to you on the phone, that is not worth anything. You have to follow it up in writing in order to make that part of your actual agreement with them.
One thing that's great about proofs these days, in many cases, especially if you're printing digitally, is you are getting a sample of the final book.
Right.
You're going to be getting something that is a one-off of what the final book will be. So if you see something there that looks wrong, it's time to talk to your printer about it. Don't just assume that it's like, oh, this was a proof.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be better when it's printed. If you see anything amiss, that's the time to communicate to your printer. this looks wrong. Is this trimmed right or whatever? That's the time to bring it up. The other thing that I would say about dealing with printers is if something seems odd, call it out. Like if you got a quote and then you asked for like a revised quote because you have an increase in quantities, double check against that first one, because printers are people too, and they make mistakes. And I've had it happen that, you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you compare it to the previous one. You think, oh, well, why is like 100 more? Why does our unit cost go up so much? An error. Right? I've gotten back in touch and they've been like, so sorry, there was an error. Here's the revised quote. And then the new one makes sense. And it's not that like they're trying to bilk you or anything, or you just have to pay attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
True. And sometimes they're quoting you for a black and white book, even though it said color, and they're not going to honor the price. And this happened to me just weeks ago, and I actually had to change change printers in midstream on a job and push a book back because the previous quote that I had based everything on had been in error, and they weren't going to go with they tried to meet me in the middle on it, but it wasn't going to fly for that particular project. And you decided to say, okay, well, sorry. I do have to go now, everybody. I just wanted to thank everybody though for an amazing conversation. And Michelle, really love your line of books, and it's been tremendous to be able to talk to you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for joining, Sean.
You guys can hear the exciting,
yes,
exciting things I've got going on now. Thank you very much, Jeff, for having me. And you guys all check out livinglinebooks.com, and Carson and I run a YouTube channel as well under the Living the Line name, and we take a look at small press books all the time, and that is our reason for existing, and really hoping that you guys all continue to make comics. Thanks.
Likewise.
Thanks, Sean. All right.
What do you think, Jeff? Is this a good place to break, or do you have anything else that you want to go over?
I was just going to say, if there's any thoughts that you had, any advice for first-time publishers who are checking out the stream, hoping to get the good word.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the good word, but I can just talk about what processes worked for me. And I think in 2019, I was privy to a confluence of events that saw me understand this kind of like overlap between short run digital printing, crowdfunding, and social media. And that overlap is kind of where I live. Mm-hmm. And it is a system that works really well for doing what I do, which is micro press, sub 1,000, selling direct to people and getting comics into the hands of enthusiastic readers. And I think it's an exciting time to be doing that kind of comics. There's so much that's available to us as publishers, as self-publishers, that just didn't exist even 5 years ago. It is more and more possible to put out a comic or a graphic novel with a small print run that looks like it belongs with every other book in the shelves in a comic shop or in a bookstore. So it's an exciting time to be producing work and being able to reach your audience. So, it can be, aside from your own time, a very low risk endeavor to start out. So start small and build from there is what I would suggest.
That's great. And I am also a very big fan of all of the books that you've been putting out. And
thanks so much.
I've been picking them up whenever I see a fun new one. I believe you also did the Mr. Monster book too, didn't you?
No, I didn't. That's Raid Studios.
Oh yeah, that one and Dishman were both very similar in ideology, and I really like both of those. But yeah, that and Dwellings, the production on Dwellings is really great. And a lot of people who try to do that and they can't achieve it. So it's great that it's so simple.
Jay is a real master at getting that retro feel in Photoshop, treating his colors. The part of the trick is he does color, like his color palette is using very similar color palettes to what were being used at the time.
Mhm.
If you are trying to do that kind of like retro line work, the biggest trick is don't have any black in your mix for your colors. Just C, M, and Y for your colors, and that will help them not look too dull on the page. And the rest of it was just kind of happenstance, happy accident that we found this printer that could do color with high-speed inkjet, and it just happened to look like old web printing on newsprint. So it all just kind of came together, and we have worked hard to just kind of work with the materials that we're using to highlight and kind of push them so that it looks entirely intentional and nothing about trying to be on a budget.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually another thing I'll ask real quick is with each of the campaigns, there's a lot of really nice add-ons, and like all the risograph prints are really beautiful that Jay puts together. But what's your approach to your pricing for add-ons? Is everything kind of in that 2.7% modifier?
So the add-ons, you know what? I don't really have like a. Well, the add-ons, actually, all of those things have been stretch goals that have been giveaways. So it's all been about, well, can we produce this so that it's not eating into the bottom line too much? And also, is it something that can ship flat? It's going to be something that doesn't weigh a lot and that can ship flat so that we're not increasing our postage cost and still look really cool. So it's all been about like, risograph looks great, and they're pretty inexpensive to produce. They can be in the range of like, for a little 6x9 risograph, you can do a 2-color one for maybe as low as like 75 cents per copy.
That's really good.
And it has that nice aesthetic, very similar to silkscreen. And Jay, again, being a really accomplished production person and designer, on top of being an illustrator, he understands the medium and knows how to play with it so that 60, 70 cents goes far in looking intentional. It's not a compromise to use that. It's a medium that we chose for that particular piece. So yeah, keep things inexpensive and fun, just push. And there's so many places where you can get things done these days. Sticker Mule is wonderful. I'm a Sticker Mule addict now. Every week they have a new thing that, on their deals, if you sign up for their email deals, there's like a new thing of like, oh, well, get 50 stickers. It's at 60% off. They're like, okay, I'll get some stickers, and then those will be like a surprise giveaway, or maybe, I'll offer them as an add-on or something like that. There's tons of little fun things that you can get printed and made that hold up in quality and aren't going to break the bank.
Yeah.
So
and I believe
Sticker
that they also do
Mules,
free shipping in Canada too, which
they do free shipping. And usually during those deals too, you can print a higher quantity and you're still getting that initial discount. So direct to garment, sticker printing, all these things that are around these days that have like high quality. You can sometimes even make sure that they're getting printed like locally. I know Sticker Mule does do it in the States. And shipped to Canada, but there's just so much fun stuff that you can make to reward your backers and make them feel like they're getting something special, so that sure, they're spending a little bit more on a floppy comic, but they're getting like almost like a fan club kit of goodies when they get their envelope, and they're getting more than just that one thing.
Because it's hard to sell a fan club these days, but yeah, on Kickstarter there's all sorts of amazing artwork that you can get on with everything.
Yes. And I think one of the other things that we stumbled upon that really worked for the kind of patron side of things is Jay selling original production art alongside each issue. So people will buy original art, and that helps generate revenue for him for each issue. So, people are literally paying him a page rate.
Yeah. And I imagine he makes like 100% of the original art that he sells, correct?
Pretty close to it. Yeah. I mean, there's fees that come from, payment processing and platform and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's pretty close to 100%.
because that's usually what I've done too with the campaigns. Is any original art, it's like, after the crowdfunder or crowdfunding website or all of the PayPal fees and whatever else, after that's all processed, and all the original art money usually I send their way. But yeah, that's a tough thing to account for. I'm glad you brought it up earlier. It was how much you try to pay people for small micro press publishing. Because
and for me, it's because I can afford to do it because it's a serious hobby for me. I have a day job. I have a day job in design, so I mean, I apply those skills in the production of the books. So I don't need to hire somebody to do that. But for me, it's more about kind of me being a bit of a patron for, like, almost like a gallery owner, right? I'm giving a platform to cartoonists to reach, hopefully, their own audience, plus some spillover shared audience from other projects.
that's great. I'm so glad you could join us. And yeah, we've just popped over, I think, the hour and a half mark. So
it sounds good. Yeah, this sounds like a good place to stop. Thanks so much, Jeff, for moderating and for doing what you do.
Yeah, and I think that it was a good discussion, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.